The cardiac monitor in the penthouse's private medical suite had been beeping for 6 straight hours, and no one could make it stop accelerating. Elara Voss stood in the doorway of the room that used to be a guest suite before it was converted into something resembling a hospital room, watching the small, pale figure in the bed and trying to remember the last time she had eaten a real meal. She couldn't. That felt about right. The girl in the bed was 7 years old. Her name was Nessa, and she had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, and she had not spoken a single intelligible word in 11 days. Not since the accident on the I-78 overpass that had killed her mother and left Nessa with a traumatic brain injury, the neurosurgeons at Penn Medicine described, in careful, expensive language, as presenting with profound emotional and neurological shutdown. In plain terms, Nessa had locked herself somewhere deep inside, and nobody had found the door. Elara was Nessa's occupational therapist, or she had been before she got fired. She was also, as of 48 hours ago, technically trespassing in the penthouse of Sterling Acquisitions' CEO, a man whose name appeared on 16 floors of office buildings across Manhattan and Philadelphia, and who had made it extremely clear, through his head of security, that he did not want anyone near his daughter who hadn't been vetted, credentialed, and background checked by a firm he paid $3,000 an hour. Elara had none of those things going for her right now. What she had was a duffel bag of sensory therapy tools, a thermos of lukewarm coffee, and 11 months of working with Nessa before any of this happened. She knew Nessa liked the weight of the heavy blanket on her feet. She knew Nessa hummed a specific tuneless melody when she was frightened, just below the audible range, and you could only feel it if you pressed your palm gently to her sternum. She knew Nessa's hands went rigid when the room smelled like artificial lavender, which every well-meaning nurse had been pumping into the ventilation system for days. She had turned off the lavender diffuser at 3 in the morning on her first unauthorized night in this apartment. Nobody had noticed yet. She wasn't sure how much longer that would last. Conrad Sterling did not panic. He had made a decision. Somewhere around his 32nd year on Earth, that panic was a form of weakness he couldn't afford. He had dismantled 2 failing companies, rebuilt them from stripped metal and bad debt, and sold them for a combined $4 billion. He had survived a federal investigation, 2 hostile takeovers, and a custody arrangement with his ex-wife that his attorney described as the most aggressively negotiated document I have ever witnessed. He did not panic. He was currently standing in the elevator of his own building, staring at the security footage on his phone, watching an unfamiliar young woman in worn-out sneakers quietly turn off his daughter's aromatherapy machine. She did it with the confidence of someone who belonged there. She did not belong there. "Who is she?" he said. It was not a question. His head of security, a quiet, efficient man named Tanner, who had worked for Conrad for 9 years, understood the distinction. Elara Voss, 28, formerly employed by the Meadowbrook Children's Rehabilitation Center in Princeton. Terminated 6 weeks ago, HR documentation suggests a patient advocacy disagreement with administration. Before that, 3 years of clean record, multiple commendations. She worked with Nessa for almost a year before the accident. Conrad watched the footage. The woman, Elara, was sitting on the floor beside Nessa's bed. She wasn't touching the child. She wasn't speaking. She was simply there, her back against the bed frame, one hand resting palm up on the floor within Nessa's reach, waiting. She got past building security, through the service entrance. She told the overnight attendant she was a medical contractor. She had a badge. It was expired, but Hargrove on the night desk didn't check the date. "I've already addressed that." Conrad said nothing. The elevator doors opened on the 43rd floor. He stepped out and walked toward the suite. "What do you want me to do with her?" Tanner asked. Conrad didn't answer. He stopped in the doorway of his daughter's room. Nessa was asleep. That alone was enough to stop him cold, because Nessa had not slept for more than 40 minutes at a stretch since they'd moved her here from the hospital. 3 sleep specialists, 2 pediatric neurologists, 1 therapist who lasted 4 sessions before resigning. And now his daughter was asleep, her small chest rising and falling in a slow, even rhythm, one hand extended over the edge of the mattress, the fingertips barely brushing the open palm of the woman sitting on his floor. Elara Voss looked up at him without flinching. She had shadows under her eyes deep enough to suggest she hadn't slept either. She was wearing a grey pullover with a frayed cuff and a pair of jeans with a faded stain near the knee. She looked like someone who had been surviving on determination and bad coffee for longer than anyone should have to. She looked at him like someone who had been expecting this exact moment and had decided, in advance, not to apologize for it. "She's been asleep for 2 hours," Elara said, her voice barely above a breath. "I'd rather she not wake up to shouting." Conrad looked at his sleeping daughter. Then he looked at the woman on the floor. "Don't move," he said quietly. "We'll talk when she wakes up." He made her talk in the kitchen 40 minutes later, standing across a marble island from each other with coffee neither of them touched. "You were terminated," he said. "I was terminated because I refused to discharge a non-verbal autistic boy 2 days after a tonsillectomy because his insurance authorization ran out. I documented everything. I'd do it again. That's not relevant to why you're in my apartment without authorization." "No," Ilara said. "What's relevant is that Nessa's neurologist, Dr. Ashby, called the center I used to work at looking for my contact information 3 days ago. I wasn't employed there anymore, so the administrator told him I was unavailable. He didn't know how else to reach me. I heard through a former colleague." She paused. "Nessa's regression is accelerating. You've had 6 specialists through here in 11 days, and none of them have sustained any real progress. I know that because the feeding log your nurse left on the counter shows she's down to less than 800 calories a day." Conrad went very still. "I'm not here to cause problems," Ilara said. Her voice stayed even, but her hands on the counter weren't steady. "I'm here because I spent 11 months learning how that little girl communicates, and she is in there. I promise you she is in there. She just can't find the way out, and I don't think she's going to find it with people she doesn't know." Conrad studied her for a long moment. She didn't look away. "You could have called," he said. "I tried your company's general line. I was told Mr. Sterling doesn't accept unsolicited contact." A beat. It seemed like the kind of situation where unsolicited contact was probably warranted anyway. He was quiet for so long that Ilara could hear the traffic 43 floors below. "You'll be supervised," Conrad said finally. "You'll have access to the suite and the adjoining therapy room. You will not go anywhere else in this apartment without escort. You'll document everything in writing and submit it daily to Dr. Ashby. If Nessa shows any sign of distress specifically related to your presence, you're gone immediately." He picked up his coffee, looked at it, set it back down. "And you'll tell me what she needs. Every supply, every piece of equipment, every adjustment to the room. You tell me and it will be handled within the hour." Ilara exhaled slowly. "The lavender diffuser," she said. "Already gone." She looked at him. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. "She likes natural light in the morning," Ilara said. "The blackout shades have been down since she got here. And she needs a specific kind of weighted blanket, not the ones you have. The glass bead kind, not plastic pellets. It has to be exactly 14 pounds. And she used to have a small music box that played a theme from an old animated film. I don't know what happened to it." Conrad pulled out his phone and typed something. Then he looked up. "It was in the car," he said quietly. The words came out sounding like something that had been wrapped in very careful packaging for a very long time. "I'll get a replacement." The first real sign came on the 4th day. Ilara was doing hand pressure therapy, pressing measured weight into Nessa's palms with a textured therapy ball. When Nessa made a sound, not quite, but a low, purposeful hum, the one Ilara recognized, the one that meant Nessa was coming towards the surface, Ilara didn't react visibly. She kept the rhythm of the exercise steady. She had learned in 11 months that the worst thing you could do when Nessa was approaching was make it feel like an event. Nessa had the instincts of a wild creature in that way. If the energy around her changed too fast, she retreated. So Ilara kept pressing the therapy ball, kept her breathing even, and started humming back. The same tuneless melody she'd heard coming from Nessa in those first early sessions at the center, the one that seemed to have no beginning or end, just a loop of 3 or 4 ascending notes. Nessa's hand moved, just slightly. Her fingers curled around the edge of the therapy ball. Ilara let her take it. The door to the suite was open, the way Ilara always kept it because closed doors made Nessa tense. And she knew without looking that Conrad Sterling was in the hallway. She had learned his tales in 4 days the way she learned everything, by paying close attention to the things people didn't realize they were broadcasting. He came to the doorway every evening around 6. He never came inside without permission. He stood very quietly, and he watched his daughter with an expression that most people would have read as blank, but that Ilara was starting to understand was the face of someone who had spent years being competent at everything, and had no idea what to do with a problem competence couldn't fix. She didn't look at him. She hummed. Nessa hummed back. Small, but real. She'd been at the apartment for 11 days when she found the pill bottle. She wasn't snooping. She was looking for an extra blanket in the hallway closet, because the temperature in Nessa's suite dropped at night and the night nurse had gone home. The closet was mostly linen and cleaning supplies. The pill bottle was on the second shelf, half hidden behind a stack of folded towels. It was prescription, Nessa's name on the label, a sedative, prescribed by a physician Ilara had never heard of. The dosage was noted as needed for acute behavioral crisis. Ilara stood very still for a moment. She had worked with enough children in institutional settings to know what is needed for behavioral crisis sometimes looked like in practice. She had also worked with Nessa long enough to know that a child in neurological shutdown didn't have behavioral crises in the traditional sense. She had shutdowns. She had dissociation. Sedating her was not going to open the door that Nessa had closed around herself. It was going to cement it shut. She put the bottle back. She took a photo with her phone. She went back to Nessa's room and sat in the chair by the bed and tried to think clearly. An hour later, she pulled up the prescribing physician's name. She didn't recognize it from Penn Medicine's network or from any of the specialists Conrad had listed. What she found instead, after 20 minutes of careful searching, was a private practice affiliated with a corporate wellness firm called Alcott Meridian Health Partners. Alcott Meridian, as she discovered through 3 more layers of search, held a consulting contract with Sterling Acquisitions, Conrad's company, which meant someone inside Conrad's own organization had arranged a prescription for his daughter through a physician on the company's payroll. She sat with that for a long time. She thought about the inheritance structure she'd overheard, discussed quietly, between 2 men in suits in the building lobby 3 days ago. Something about the Sterling family trust, about a provision tied to Nessa's medical status, about a Guardian ad litem review scheduled for 60 days post-accident. She hadn't understood what she was hearing then. She was starting to understand now. If Nessa remained in documented neurological shutdown, non-communicative, non-responsive, dependent on sedation for management, the Guardian Review Board might recommend a change in custodial arrangements. Conrad had a younger brother. She had seen his photograph in the framed family photo on the hallway sideboard. She had also seen his name, later on a legal document left carelessly on the kitchen counter by someone in Conrad's legal team. His name was Foster Sterling, and his signature appeared on the Alcott Meridian consulting contract. Elara did not sleep that night. She sat in the chair next to Nessa, very methodically, through every piece of information she had, and by 4 in the morning she was certain of 2 things. Nessa was being deliberately kept chemically suppressed, at intervals calibrated to look like prescribed medical care, and whoever was managing it had access to this apartment. She was in the kitchen at 6:15 when Conrad came down. He was already dressed, which she had learned meant he'd been awake for hours. He moved through his own apartment the way powerful men who lived alone often did, efficiently, in straight lines, without ceremony. He poured coffee. He looked at her. "You look terrible," he said. "I need to show you something," Elara said. She set her phone on the counter. The photo of the pill bottle, the Alcott Meridian search results she'd screenshotted, the consulting contract signature. She had organized them in order, the way she organized therapy documentation. Clear sequence, no interpretation until the facts were laid out. She watched Conrad look at each item. His face did the thing she was starting to recognize, the controlled blankness that meant the thing behind it was moving very fast. "Where did you find the bottle?" he said. "Hallway closet." "Second shelf. I've never seen that prescription." "I know. It's not from Dr. Ashby's team. The prescribing physician is affiliated with Alcott Meridian, Foster's firm." "Yes." Conrad set the phone down. He pressed both hands flat on the counter and looked at the marble surface for a long moment. When he looked up, his eyes were very dark and very quiet. "How long?" he said. "I don't know. I can't tell from what I have when the administration started. But Nessa's regression accelerated sharply, about 8 days before you moved her here from the hospital. The nursing log from the hospital stay might show something. If you can access it, I can access it. Conrad." She used his name because the formality felt wrong in this specific moment. "She's making progress. Real progress. The sedative is dosed to look like medical management, but it's working against everything we're trying to do. If you can get an independent toxicology screen, something outside the Sterling Acquisitions medical network." "I have people," he said. His voice had gone to somewhere very quiet and very final. "I know you have people. I'm asking you to make sure they're not connected to your brother." He looked at her for a long moment. "Good catch," he said. She exhaled. "I want you to know," Conrad said, his voice lower now, "that you are in possession of information that could cause considerable damage to a number of powerful people. There will be people who will want to know what you know. And who told you?" "I know that," Elara said. She met his eyes steadily. "I'm still telling you." Something shifted in his expression, a small shift. But she noticed it because she'd spent the last 11 days learning to read the things Conrad Sterling didn't say out loud. The next 72 hours happened the way things happen when a man like Conrad Sterling decides to move completely and all at once. A private medical team, sourced through a contact Conrad described only as outside the usual channels, ran a comprehensive blood panel on Nessa. The results came back in 14 hours. There were trace metabolites consistent with intermittent benzodiazepine administration. Low level, carefully dosed, invisible in any standard pediatric welfare check. The nursing access logs for the apartment showed that one of the rotating overnight nurses, a woman named Petra, who had been placed by a staffing agency Alara had never heard Conrad mention, had been accessing the hallway closet during every shift. Petra was no longer on the schedule within an hour of that discovery, and Alara gathered from the particular quality of Conrad's silence when he delivered that information that Petra would be spending the near future in conversation with several unpleasant attorneys. What Alara did not know until Conrad told her on the second evening of the 72 hours was that Foster Sterling had been quietly building a case for 18 months. The Guardian ad litem review was not standard procedure. Foster's attorneys had petitioned for it, citing Conrad's work hours, his travel schedule, his history of what the petition described as prioritizing professional obligations over the child's primary relational needs. The accident had accelerated the timeline. Nessa's neurological shutdown, if it continued and remained undocumented as responsive to treatment, would have supported a modification of the guardianship structure. He wanted Nessa, Alara said. He wanted control of the trust, Conrad said. Nessa is the mechanism. Alara looked at him. There's a difference. Conrad was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. There is. She was in the therapy room with Nessa on the third day of the 72 hours when the apartment lost power. Not the whole building, just the apartment. The lights went off with a flat, definitive click, and the electronic locks on the main door cycled through a reset sequence. And in the 10 seconds of silence that followed, Alara heard the service elevator engage. She moved before she thought about it. She gathered Nessa. She was getting better at this, at moving the child without startling her, the way you learn to carry something very fragile, and crossed to the therapy room's inner door, which connected to a small storage corridor that ran the width of the suite. She had learned the apartment's layout in 11 days because she learned the layout of every room she worked in. Old habit. Necessary habit, it turned out. She got into the corridor and pulled the door closed behind them. Nessa was awake. She was trembling, but she wasn't making sound, which was either progress or shock, and Alara wasn't going to think too hard about which right now. "I've got you," Alara breathed against the top of Nessa's head. She could feel the child's heart hammering. "I've got you, sweet girl. Quiet now." She heard footsteps in the main room, the particular heavy tread of someone who wasn't trying to be subtle because they weren't expecting anyone to be in the storage corridor. Two voices, low. She caught fragments. "Voss is a problem now too. She's seen too much. Just make it look like the kid had a bad night. Happens with TBI cases all the time. Foster wants it clean." Alara pressed her back against the interior wall and looked at the small ventilation panel 6 inches above her head. Behind it was the building's maintenance conduit. She had noticed it on day 3 and thought, idly, that it was the kind of architectural detail you'd never think about unless you'd once spent 6 hours hiding in a supply closet from your ex-boyfriend's friends. She had spent 6 hours hiding in a supply closet from her ex-boyfriend's friends 3 years ago, which was why she'd gotten very good at learning the exact dimensions of secondary exits. She wasn't going to fit with Nessa. The conduit was too narrow, but the service stairwell door at the far end of the corridor, the one she was not technically supposed to know about, was a different matter. She moved. The door to the service stairwell was a push-bar release. She hit it at a controlled pace, catching it before it could slam, and started down. 14 floors down, she hit a landing where the stairwell opened into a maintenance level. She stopped there, breathing hard, Nessa clinging to her with both arms in a way she hadn't done since the first week they'd worked together. Tight, real contact, the grip of someone who was choosing to hold on. Alara pressed her lips to Nessa's temple. "You're doing so well," she whispered. I know this is scary. You're so brave." She pulled out her phone and found Conrad's private number, the one he had given her on day 2, after he decided she wasn't going anywhere. He picked up on the first ring. "Where are you?" he said. Not a question. "Maintenance level 14. There are 2 men in the apartment. They're talking about Foster. I heard them say your daughter's name, Conrad." A pause. Short, very controlled. "Don't move," he said. "Tanner and 2 others are in the building. They'll be with you in under 3 minutes. Do not open the stairwell door for anyone until you hear Tanner's voice specifically. Understood, Alara." She'd noticed he'd started using her name somewhere around day 6. "Yeah, is she all right?" She looked down at Nessa, who had her face pressed into Alara's shoulder and her arms wound tight around her neck. Nessa's hands were shaking, but she was holding on. She was choosing to hold on. "She's holding on," Alara said. The next part went the way Conrad Sterling handled problems. Completely, without ceremony, and with a thoroughness that left very little room for ambiguity. Tanner and his team secured the maintenance level in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The men from the apartment were intercepted in the building lobby by security and held for the NYPD detectives Conrad had apparently contacted from the car on the way back from his last meeting, because he had known this was coming and had prepared accordingly. He found Ilara and Nessa in the maintenance corridor, sitting on the concrete floor with Ilara's pullover folded into a makeshift cushion, Nessa pressed against her side. She was humming. The 3-note melody. Nessa was humming back. Conrad crouched down in front of them in his $4,000 suit on a maintenance-level floor and looked at his daughter. Nessa looked at him. She hadn't looked at him directly, with focus, since the accident. Every specialist had noted it. It had been in every report, every documentation, listed as a marker of the severity of her shutdown. She looked at him now, dark eyes, his eyes focused and present and frightened and real. "Hi, Bug," Conrad said. His voice came out entirely unlike anything Ilara had heard from him in 11 days. "I'm here." Nessa reached out her hand. Conrad took it. The sound that came from somewhere in his chest was quiet, not quite steady, the sound of a man whose composure had briefly and completely stopped working. He gathered his daughter against him carefully, one large hand supporting her head the way Ilara had shown him on day 5, and held her. Ilara stayed where she was, giving them the moment, pressing her own back against the cold concrete wall, and trying to remember how breathing worked when you'd been running on adrenaline for 40 minutes. She almost made it. She almost kept it together. Then Nessa reached back, over her father's arm, and found Ilara's hand in the dark. Ilara closed her eyes. Foster Sterling was arrested on 3 car counts related to financial fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit medical abuse, and 1 count of interference with a custody proceeding. His attorney issued a statement claiming he had acted out of concern for Nessa's welfare. The statement used the phrase "best interests of the child" 4 times. Conrad's legal team responded with 114 pages of documentation. The Guardian ad litem review was cancelled. What happened after that was quieter, the way things become quiet when the emergency is over and there's just life left to deal with. Nessa said her first word in 17 days on a Tuesday morning. She said it to Ilara, who was doing a fine motor therapy exercise with small textured tiles. The word was a color, rusty voice, like a door opening on unused hinges. Ilara set the tile down very carefully. "Yeah," she said, "that one's blue." Nessa picked up a green tile and looked at Ilara. "Green," Ilara said. Nessa set it down and picked up a yellow one and looked at her. Yellow. They did that for an hour. When Conrad appeared in the doorway at 6 the way he always did, Nessa held up a red tile and looked at him. He understood without being told. "Red," he said. The faintest curve appeared at the corner of Nessa's mouth. 3 weeks later, Conrad found Ilara standing at the window of the therapy room, watching the last of the evening light wash across the Philadelphia skyline. He had offered her a formal position, therapeutic consultant, salaried, benefits, a title that reflected what she actually did. And she had agreed, and they had done the paperwork that afternoon, and now she was standing at the window looking like someone who hadn't quite figured out how to exist in a situation that was good. "You do that a lot," he said. "Stand at windows. I think better near natural light." He came to stand beside her, close enough that she was aware of him, which she was generally aware of him now, in a way she found professionally inconvenient and personally unavoidable. "I want to tell you something," Conrad said. She waited. "When Tanner showed me the security footage. The first night, you sitting on the floor next to her bed." He was quiet for a moment. "I have spent 3 years being the person who provides everything Nessa needs. The best schools, the best medical care, the best of everything I could think of to quantify. And it had not occurred to me that what she might need most was someone who would simply sit on the floor next to her and wait." Ilara looked at her reflection in the window. "That's not a parenting failure," she said. "That's just not knowing what you don't know. You knew I had 11 months of practice." She paused. "And I wasn't carrying what you're carrying." He looked at her. "What am I carrying?" She turned to face him. She had learned to read him in 27 days, which was fast even for her, and what she read now was a man who had held himself at an exact, controlled distance from everything painful for long enough that he had genuinely stopped noticing the distance. "Everything," she said. "You're carrying everything, and you haven't let anyone stand next to you and wait." The silence in the room was very complete. Then Conrad Sterling, who did not panic and did not ask for help, and had dismantled and rebuilt 4 companies from their bones, took a step toward her and said nothing at all, which she was beginning to understand was how he said the things that mattered most. She stayed where she was. She didn't retreat. His hand came up and he tucked a strand of hair back from her face with a gentleness that didn't match anything else about him and matched him exactly. "Stay," he said, simple. Not a command. She knew what his command sounded like. This was something else entirely. "I'm staying," Elara said. From down the hall, small and clear and real, they heard Nessa's voice humming her three-note melody to the replacement music box Conrad had sourced from a collector in Vermont, and Elara Voss, who had walked into a stranger's building with a frayed cuff and an expired badge because a little girl needed someone who already knew her, leaned against Conrad Sterling's shoulder and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be.